When my son Marcus told me I was too old and too slow for the family vacation to Costa Rica, I smiled, nodded, and said I understood. What I didn't tell him was that while he was planning his little beach getaway, I'd be relaxing in my secret oceanfront mansion in Malibu, the one nobody in my family knew I owned. They thought I was just a retired school librarian living on a pension. They had no idea I'd been quietly building a real estate empire for the past 15 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Teresa Hill, but everyone calls me Terry. I'm 73 years old, and for the past 5 decades, I've been the family peacekeeper, the one who smoothed over arguments, remembered every birthday, and somehow always found room in my modest 2-bedroom apartment for Sunday dinners that grew larger every year. My late husband Robert and I raised 4 children on his construction worker's salary and my librarian wages, clipping coupons and making every dollar stretch until it screamed. What my family never knew was that Robert had taught me more than just how to balance a checkbook. He'd shown me how to read property assessments, how to spot neighborhoods on the verge of gentrification, and how to recognize when a rundown property was actually a diamond waiting to be polished. When he passed away 12 years ago, I didn't just inherit his life insurance policy. I inherited his eye for real estate and his stubborn determination to never be caught financially unprepared again. The first property I bought was a tiny duplex in what everyone called the bad part of town. I used Robert's life insurance money as a down payment and rented out both sides to college students. Within 2 years, that bad neighborhood became the trendy arts district, and my little duplex tripled in value. I sold it and bought 2 more properties, then 4, then 8. I reinvested every penny, lived in the same small apartment, drove the same old Honda Civic, and let my family believe I was just getting by on Social Security and a modest pension. I wasn't hiding my success out of shame or fear. I was protecting it. You see, I'd watched what happened to my sister Margaret when she won $50,000 in the lottery. Suddenly, every family member had an emergency. Every grandchild needed college tuition, and every holiday became an expectation that she'd pick up the check. Within 3 years, the money was gone, and Margaret was left feeling used and resentful. I decided early on that my financial independence would remain my secret until I decided otherwise. The vacation conversation happened on a humid Sunday afternoon in July at my son Marcus's house in suburban Atlanta. The whole family had gathered for what was supposed to be a planning session for our annual summer trip. For 28 years, we'd taken these vacations together. First it was camping when the kids were small, then lake houses when they became teenagers, and in recent years rented condos at various beach destinations. I'd always contributed my fair share, sometimes more when one of the kids was going through a rough financial patch. Marcus stood at the head of his granite kitchen island, looking every inch the successful real estate broker he'd become, his polo shirt perfectly pressed, and his hair styled with the kind of expensive gel that promised to hold through Atlanta humidity. His wife Sandra sat beside him, scrolling through her phone with the detached air of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. Their twin daughters, Emma and Sophie, both 16, were busy taking selfies in the corner, occasionally rolling their eyes at whatever the adults were discussing. My other children were scattered around the kitchen like they were attending a board meeting. My eldest daughter Patricia, a nurse practitioner, sat with her husband Mike and their 20-year-old son Jake, who was home from college and seemed more interested in his video game than family vacation planning. My second son David had driven up from Savannah with his partner Carlos, and my youngest daughter Rachel was there with her girlfriend Amy and their adopted son Tyler, who was 8, and the only one who seemed genuinely excited about the prospect of a family trip. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was surrounded by successful adults who'd built good lives for themselves, partly because Robert and I had worked ourselves to the bone to give them opportunities we never had, and yet somehow I'd become the family member they worried about financially. Marcus pulled up photos on his laptop and turned the screen toward the group. The images showed a stunning resort in Costa Rica, complete with zip lines through the rainforest, white sand beaches, and infinity pools that seemed to blend into the Pacific Ocean. Even I had to admit it looked spectacular. "So here's what I'm thinking," Marcus began, his voice taking on the practiced tone he probably used with clients. "We rent this whole compound for a week. It's got 8 bedrooms, so there's plenty of space for everyone. The cost breaks down to about $4,000 per family, which I know sounds like a lot, But when you factor in meals, activities, and the fact that it's completely private, he kept talking, but I was doing the math in my head. $4,000 would be a stretch for some of them, though they'd never admit it. Patricia and Mike were still paying off nursing school loans. David and Carlos had just bought their first house. Rachel and Amy were managing on one income, while Amy finished her master's degree. But they'd all agree because that's what our family did. We found a way to make things work, even when they didn't quite fit. The only thing is, Marcus continued, and something in his tone made me look up from my mental calculations, I think we need to be realistic about the activity level. This isn't going to be a relaxing beach vacation. There's hiking, zip-lining, horseback riding through the mountains. It's pretty physically demanding. Sandra finally looked up from her phone. Plus, the rooms are all on different levels, lots of stairs. The pool area requires walking down this steep stone path. I felt a small knot form in my stomach, but I kept my expression neutral. I'd been hiking just last month during a solo trip to Asheville. I'd ziplined in New Zealand 3 years ago, though none of them knew about that trip. I walked 5 miles every morning and could probably outlast half of them on any physical challenge. But I could see where this conversation was heading. Patricia cleared her throat uncomfortably. Mom, what do you think? Does it sound like something you'd enjoy? The careful way she asked the question told me everything I needed to know. They'd already discussed this among themselves. They'd already decided that I was too old, too fragile, too much of a liability for their adventure vacation. They were asking for my opinion as a formality, hoping I'd bow out gracefully so they wouldn't have to uninvite me directly. It sounds wonderful, I said honestly, because it truly did. Very exciting. Marcus and Sandra exchanged a look. David shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Rachel stared at her hands. The thing is, Mom, Marcus said, his voice taking on that patient tone people use when they're about to deliver bad news they think is actually good news. Maybe this year we should plan something more appropriate for everyone's comfort level. What do you mean by that? I asked, though I already knew. Well, you're 73, Sandra said, as if I might have forgotten. And some of these activities have age restrictions. Plus, if something happened, if you got hurt, we'd be in a foreign country dealing with medical emergencies. I'm in excellent health, I pointed out. Dr. Martinez says I have the blood pressure of a 40-year-old. That's great, Mom, really. Patricia jumped in, her nurse training making her the designated medical authority. But it's not just about health, it's about mobility, reaction time, endurance. These adventure vacations are designed for younger people. I looked around the room at my children and their families. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. These were the people I'd raised. The ones I'd sat up with during fever-induced nightmares. The ones I'd driven to soccer practice and piano lessons and debate tournaments. I'd attended every graduation, every wedding, every grandchild's birthday party. I'd been the constant, reliable presence in their lives for decades, and now they were telling me I was too old to keep up. So what are you suggesting? I asked quietly. Marcus brightened, as if he'd been waiting for this opening. What if this year you took your own vacation? Something more relaxed, more suited to your interests? You could visit Aunt Margaret in Florida, or maybe take one of those river cruises you're always talking about. I wasn't always talking about river cruises. I'd mentioned once, years ago, that they looked peaceful in the travel brochures. But apparently, that single comment had morphed in their minds into a persistent fascination with sedentary travel designed for senior citizens. We could even help you plan something, Rachel offered, her voice overly bright. There are some really nice packages specifically designed for mature travelers. Mature travelers. The phrase hit me like a slap. When had I become a mature traveler instead of just a traveler? When had my age become the defining characteristic that determined what experiences I was allowed to have? You know what? I said, standing up and smoothing down my blouse. You're absolutely right. I think a different kind of vacation would be perfect for me this year. The relief in the room was palpable. Marcus actually smiled. Sandra nodded approvingly. Patricia reached over and patted my hand like I was a good child who'd finally seen reason. That's great, Mom. David said. "We want you to be comfortable and enjoy yourself." "Oh, I will," I said, gathering my purse and car keys. "I'm going to have the most relaxing, comfortable vacation I've ever had." As I drove home to my modest apartment complex, I wasn't angry. I was something much more dangerous than angry. I was motivated. They thought I was too old for adventure? They thought I needed to stick to activities designed for mature travelers? They had no idea what their old mother was capable of. That evening, I sat in my small living room with my laptop and pulled up the real estate portfolio I'd been building for over a decade. Property after property filled the screen, each one representing a piece of the financial independence I'd been quietly constructing while my family worried about my pension and Social Security. The crown jewel of my collection was a sprawling oceanfront estate in Malibu that I'd purchased 2 years ago from a tech executive who'd needed to liquidate quickly during a messy divorce. The mansion had 6 bedrooms, each with its own balcony overlooking the Pacific. There was an infinity pool that seemed to spill directly into the ocean, a private beach accessible only by a winding stone staircase, and a wine cellar stocked with bottles that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The property had been featured in Architectural Digest before I bought it, and the previous owner had spared no expense on amenities. There was a home theater, a fitness center that rivaled anything you'd find at an expensive club, and a chef's kitchen with appliances that most restaurants would envy. I'd been renting it out through a high-end vacation rental service, charging $15,000 a week to celebrities and tech moguls who wanted privacy and luxury. The income from that single property was more than my entire family thought I lived on in a year. But for the week they'd be ziplining through Costa Rica, treating me like a fragile elderly woman who couldn't handle adventure. I was going to block out the calendar and treat myself to the vacation of a lifetime. I opened my laptop and began planning. First, I canceled the rental bookings for the week they'd be gone, refunding deposits and explaining that the property was needed for personal use. Then I called my property manager, a discreet woman named Vivian who handled the high-end rentals, and told her I'd be staying at the Malibu house myself. "Of course, Mrs. Hill," Vivian said without missing a beat. She was used to wealthy clients making last-minute changes. "Would you like me to arrange for staff? Chef service, housekeeping, personal shopping?" "The full service package," I said, feeling a thrill run through me. "And Vivian? I'd like to document this vacation. Could you arrange for a photographer? Someone discreet who can capture the experience without being intrusive?" "Absolutely. I know just the person. Anything else?" I thought for a moment. "What's the most exclusive spa in the area?" "The Sanctuary at Jade Mountain. It's impossible to get appointments unless you're a regular client or someone very special recommends you." "Perfect. Book me a full-day package. Whatever their most luxurious treatment is." "Consider it done." After I hung up, I sat back in my threadbare recliner and smiled. My family thought they were protecting me by excluding me from their adventure vacation. They thought they were being kind by suggesting I stick to mature, appropriate activities. What they didn't realize was that they'd just given me the perfect opportunity to reveal exactly who Terry Hill really was. I spent the next 3 days preparing for my vacation with the same meticulous attention to detail I'd used to build my real estate empire. I researched every restaurant within driving distance of the Malibu house, made reservations at 3 that required months of advance booking, and arranged for a private wine tasting at a vineyard that normally only accommodated groups of 20 or more. I also went shopping, something I rarely did for myself. I drove to the upscale mall across town and spent an afternoon in stores I'd never had reason to enter. I bought a wardrobe that would photograph well against the backdrop of oceanfront luxury. Flowing maxi dresses, elegant cover-ups, a stunning one-piece bathing suit that somehow made me look 10 years younger, and sandals that cost more than I usually spent on shoes in an entire year. The saleswoman at the boutique, a young woman probably Emma and Sophie's age, treated me with the kind of respectful attention usually reserved for serious shoppers. When I paid with the credit card linked to my investment account, she didn't bat an eye at the total, which was well into 4 figures. "Are you going somewhere special?" she asked, as she wrapped my purchases in tissue paper. "Just a little vacation," I said. I'm celebrating being exactly the right age for adventure. She smiled, not understanding the significance of my words, but something in my tone must have conveyed my excitement, because she added an extra sample of expensive perfume to my bag. During those preparation days, I also did something I hadn't done in years. I called in favors. I reached out to connections I'd made through my real estate investments, people who moved in circles my family couldn't imagine I had access to. A former client who owned a gallery in Beverly Hills arranged for me to attend an exclusive art opening. A contractor who'd worked on several of my properties introduced me to his brother, who happened to be a helicopter pilot offering private coastal tours. By the time my family left for Costa Rica, I had planned a week that would make their adventure vacation look like a church youth group outing. But more than that, I'd arranged for every moment to be documented. Not for social media or public consumption, but for my own satisfaction and, if I decided the time was right, for a revelation that would shift the entire family dynamic permanently. The morning they departed, I got a text from Marcus. "Have a great time on your senior cruise, Mom. We'll bring you back something nice from Costa Rica." I smiled as I typed back, "I'm sure I'll have exactly the adventure I deserve." Then I loaded my new luggage into my Honda Civic and drove west toward Malibu, toward a week that would prove once and for all that age was just a number, and that sometimes the most important adventures begin exactly when other people think they should end. The Pacific Coast Highway stretched ahead of me like a ribbon of possibilities, and for the first time in years, I felt like the author of my own story instead of a supporting character in everyone else's. They wanted me to act my age? Perfect. I was about to show them exactly what 73 looked like when it came with intelligence, independence, and the kind of financial freedom they'd never suspected I possessed. As I drove past million-dollar beach houses and exclusive resorts, I thought about all the vacations I'd compromised on, all the times I'd chosen the budget option so others could have what they wanted, all the years I'd been grateful for whatever place was made for me at the table. This week, I wasn't going to be grateful for anything. I was going to be exactly as magnificent as I'd always had the capacity to be, but had kept hidden for the sake of family harmony. The irony was perfect. They thought they were protecting me from physical challenges I couldn't handle. What they'd actually done was give me the freedom to prove that the biggest adventure of all was living life on my own terms, regardless of what anyone else thought I was capable of. And if, at the end of the week, I decided to let them know exactly what their too-old mother had been up to while they were ziplining through the rainforest, well, that would be the most satisfying revelation of all. The security gate at Ocean Vista Estates recognized my license plate immediately. As I drove through the manicured entrance past perfectly sculpted topiary and imported palm trees, I felt the familiar surge of satisfaction that came with ownership. This wasn't just wealth for the sake of wealth. This was security, independence, and the freedom to live exactly as I chose. The driveway to my mansion curved through landscaping that cost more to maintain each month than most people spent on their mortgage. Native California plants mixed with exotic specimens created a garden that looked effortlessly natural but required a team of specialists to achieve that casual perfection. As the house came into view, I still felt a small thrill of ownership. The architect had designed it to look like it had grown organically from the cliff top, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows that captured every possible ocean view. The exterior was a warm, sand-colored stone that seemed to change color throughout the day, shifting from pale cream in the morning light to rich gold at sunset. 3 levels cascaded down the cliff face, each one offering different perspectives of the endless Pacific. I pulled into the circular drive and sat for a moment in my modest Honda, appreciating the contrast. Tomorrow, Vivian would have a luxury car delivered for my use during the week, but today I wanted to savor this moment of transition from my ordinary life to the extraordinary one I'd created in secret. The front door opened before I could ring the bell. Maria Santos, the head of housekeeping for the property management company, greeted me with the kind of warm professionalism that made staying here feel like visiting a 5-star resort, rather than arriving at my own home. "Mrs. Hill, welcome," she said, taking my luggage before I could protest. "Everything is prepared exactly as you requested. The flowers were delivered this morning, the wine selection is chilled and ready, and Chef Andreas will arrive at 4 to discuss this evening's menu." I followed her through the entry hall, where a massive chandelier made from pieces of driftwood and sea glass cast dancing patterns on the travertine floors. The living room beyond was a symphony of whites and creams and soft blues, with furniture positioned to take advantage of the panoramic ocean view. 2 walls of glass could slide completely open, creating an indoor-outdoor space that made the Pacific feel like part of the room's design. "The photographer will arrive tomorrow at 10, Maria continued, leading me toward the master suite. "Her name is Isabella Chen, and she comes very highly recommended. Very discreet, very artistic. She specializes in lifestyle photography for distinguished clients." The master bedroom occupied the entire top floor, with windows on 3 sides and a private balcony that extended out over the cliff. The bed faced the ocean, positioned so that the first thing I'd see each morning would be endless blue water stretching to the horizon. The ensuite bathroom featured a soaking tub carved from a single piece of marble, positioned next to a window that offered complete privacy while maintaining the ocean view. "Will you be needing anything else before Chef Andreas arrives?" Maria asked, setting my luggage on the bench at the foot of the bed. "Just some time to settle in," I said. "This is perfect." After she left, I stood alone in the master suite and allowed myself a moment of pure appreciation. I'd worked for this. Every coupon I'd clipped, every secondhand purchase I'd made, every time I'd chosen the cheaper option so my children could have what they wanted, had been an investment in this moment. I wasn't a woman living on a fixed income, carefully budgeting for small pleasures. I was someone who could afford to live like this every day if I chose to. I unpacked my new clothes in the walk-in closet, hanging each piece carefully and admiring how different they looked in this setting. The flowing sundresses and elegant cover-ups that had seemed almost too fancy in the boutique now looked perfectly appropriate for a week at an oceanfront estate. I changed into a white linen dress and sandals, pulled my silver hair back in a loose bun, and walked out onto the master balcony. The view was staggering. 70 feet below, waves crashed against the private beach, sending spray high enough to catch the afternoon light in miniature rainbows. To the north, the coastline curved away toward Point Dumais, dotted with other expensive homes that looked like toys from this height. To the south, the beach stretched toward Manhattan Beach, where tiny figures of surfers and joggers moved like ants along the sand. I thought about my family, probably just arriving at their Costa Rican resort about now. They'd be checking into their rooms, maybe exploring the property, possibly beginning to realize that the activities they'd deemed too challenging for me were exactly the kind of adventures I'd been quietly enjoying on my solo trips for years. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Made it safely to Costa Rica. Resort is beautiful. Hope you're having a nice quiet day at home." I smiled and typed back, "Having a perfectly lovely day. The view here is incredible." It wasn't technically a lie. I was having a lovely day, and the view was indeed incredible. I just wasn't at the address they thought I was. Chef Andreas arrived promptly at 4, a tall man with graying temples and the kind of understated confidence that came from years of cooking for people who expected perfection. He'd brought samples of local seafood, organic vegetables from a farm in Oxnard, and a selection of wines from vineyards I'd never heard of but that apparently represented the cutting edge of California winemaking. "For tonight, I'm thinking something light but elegant," he said, arranging ingredients on the massive kitchen island. "Perhaps the local halibut, with a citrus beer blanc, roasted vegetables from the farmer's market, and a simple salad with greens from the restaurant's own garden." "The restaurant's own garden?" I asked. "I source from Café Gratitude in Venice. They grow their own microgreens and edible flowers. Very sustainable, very pure." He paused. "Unless you'd prefer something more traditional?" "The halibut sounds perfect," I said. "I'm in the mood for trying new things." As he began preparing dinner, I poured myself a glass of the wine he'd recommended and wandered through the house, reacquainting myself with spaces I'd only seen during the initial purchase walkthrough and the few times I'd visited to check on renovation progress. The property manager had done an excellent job maintaining everything exactly as I'd specified, but being here as a guest in my own home felt different than inspecting it as an investment. The media room featured a screen that took up an entire wall and seating that felt more like being embraced by a cloud than sitting in a chair. The library had floor-to-ceiling built-in shelves stocked with first editions and contemporary bestsellers, with a reading nook positioned to catch the best afternoon light. The wine cellar was climate-controlled perfection, with bottles organized by region and vintage in a way that suggested serious curatorial attention. But it was the small details that impressed me most. Fresh flowers in every room, but not the generic arrangements you'd expect from a service. These were sophisticated, artistic compositions that looked like they belonged in a museum. The towels in every bathroom were perfectly folded and positioned. The kitchen was stocked not just with basic necessities, but with specialty items that suggested whoever managed this property understood that guests with these resources expected options they couldn't get anywhere else. During dinner, which was indeed perfect, I found myself thinking about the conversations that would happen this week while I was gone. My children would probably discuss my absence with relief, happy that they didn't have to worry about me slowing down their adventures. They'd congratulate themselves on handling the situation tactfully, on sparing my feelings while ensuring their vacation went smoothly. They had no idea that their tactful exclusion had given me the opportunity to live more luxuriously for 1 week than they'd probably ever experienced in their lives. After Chef Andreas cleaned up and left, I took a glass of wine out to the infinity pool. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reflected off the water's surface. The pool's edge seemed to blend seamlessly with the ocean beyond, creating the illusion that I was floating on the Pacific itself. I thought about calling Robert's brother Tom, the only family member who knew about my real estate investments. Tom had been the one to suggest I buy property instead of letting Robert's life insurance money sit in a savings account, and he'd been quietly proud of what I'd accomplished. But I'd sworn him to secrecy, and he'd kept his word even when other family members worried about my finances within his hearing. Tom would appreciate the irony of this situation. He'd probably laugh at the image of me sipping wine by an infinity pool while his nephews and nieces worried about whether I could handle ziplining. As darkness settled over the water, I made a decision. This week wasn't just going to be about enjoying luxury in secret. It was going to be about documenting every moment, creating a record of exactly what their too-old mother was capable of experiencing and enjoying. Not for revenge exactly, but for revelation. Someday when the time was right, I wanted to be able to show them exactly what they'd underestimated. I spent the evening planning the next day's activities. Isabella, the photographer, would arrive in the morning to capture whatever adventures I chose to embark on. I'd already booked the helicopter tour for afternoon, and Vivian had confirmed my reservation at Neptune's Net for lunch, followed by the wine tasting at Malibu Family Wines. Tomorrow would be a day of adventures that would make ziplining look like a children's playground activity. But tonight was for savoring the quiet luxury of having this entire estate to myself. I drew a bath in the marble soaking tub, adding lavender salts that had been left as an amenity, and settled in to watch the moon rise over the Pacific. The water was the perfect temperature, the view was spectacular, and I was exactly where I belonged. Living life on my own terms, at my own pace, with resources I'd earned through my own intelligence and hard work. My phone buzzed with a group text from Marcus. Day 1 in Costa Rica was amazing. Zip-lined through the canopy and did a nature hike. Probably too intense for some family members, but we're all keeping up great. The passive-aggressive reference to my absence was so obvious it was almost funny. I considered responding, but decided to let them wonder about my reaction. Instead, I sank deeper into the bath and smiled. Tomorrow, while they were probably nursing sore muscles from their intense hike, I'd be soaring above the Malibu coastline, in a private helicopter, documenting adventures they couldn't imagine their elderly mother enjoying. The next morning, I woke naturally at sunrise, no alarm needed. The master bedroom faced east, and the early light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows was like waking up inside a painting. I made coffee using the espresso machine that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent and took it out onto the balcony to watch the ocean wake up. Below, a few early surfers were already in the water, dark figures against the silver waves. A pelican flew past at eye level, close enough that I could see the careful way it angled its wings to catch the morning thermals. The only sounds were the waves against the cliff and the distant calls of seagulls. I thought about my usual morning routine. Instant coffee in my small kitchen, 5 miles walking through the suburban streets around my apartment complex, maybe stopping to chat with neighbors who were also up early for their exercise. That routine had its own pleasures, its own sense of accomplishment and community. But this morning felt like stepping into a different version of myself, one that had been waiting patiently for the right moment to emerge. Isabella Chen arrived exactly at 10, carrying professional camera equipment that looked expensive enough to fund a small vacation. She was probably in her 40s, with the kind of understated style that marked her as someone accustomed to working with wealthy clients. Everything about her suggested competence without ostentation. Quality clothes that wouldn't distract from her work, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back efficiently but elegantly. "Mrs. Hill, it's a pleasure to meet you," she said, shaking my hand with exactly the right amount of firmness. "Vivian tells me you're interested in documenting a special vacation week. I specialize in lifestyle photography that captures authentic moments rather than posed portraits. Does that sound like what you're looking for?" "Exactly," I said. "I want to remember this week exactly as it happens. Natural moments, real experiences." "Perfect. And I understand discretion is important. Nothing will be shared or published without your explicit permission. This is entirely for your personal use." We spent a few minutes discussing the day's plans and the kinds of shots that would work best with each activity. Isabella had done her research on the helicopter tour and the wine tasting, and she'd brought equipment that would capture both intimate moments and sweeping landscapes. "Should I ask what's special about this particular week?" she said as we walked through the house toward the pool area. "I'm celebrating being exactly the right age for adventure," I said, repeating the phrase I'd used with the boutique saleswoman. Isabella smiled. "I like that. Most of my clients are either trying to look younger than they are or older than they are, depending on what they think will serve them. It's refreshing to work with someone who's comfortable with exactly who she is." If only she knew, I thought. But in a way, she was right. For the first time in years, I was going to be exactly who I was, without apology or adjustment for other people's comfort. We started with photos around the property. Isabella captured me having coffee on the master balcony, walking through the garden, sitting by the infinity pool with the ocean stretching endlessly behind me. She worked quickly and unobtrusively, making suggestions about lighting and angles but letting me move naturally through the spaces. "You have a good eye for composition," she commented as she reviewed some shots on her camera. "Most people freeze up in front of a camera, but you seem to understand how to work with the environment." "I've spent a lot of years watching other people get their pictures taken," I said. "You learn things." It was true. Decades of family photos where I was always the one behind the camera, making sure everyone else looked good, had taught me more about photography than I'd realized. I knew how to find the best light, how to position myself to take advantage of backgrounds, how to look natural while being aware of what the camera was seeing. At noon, we drove to the heliport at Santa Monica Airport. Isabella followed in her own car, and I took the luxury sedan that Vivian had arranged for me, a silver BMW that handled like a dream and made every mile feel effortless. The contrast with my Honda Civic was stark, but not in a way that made me dissatisfied with my usual car. Instead, it reminded me that I could choose different tools for different purposes, and this week called for tools that matched the scale of the experience. The helicopter tour was everything I'd hoped it would be, and more. Captain Steve Martinez, a former military pilot who'd been flying tourists along the coast for 15 years, treated me with the same respect he'd show any client, regardless of age. He helped me into the aircraft with professional courtesy, explained the safety procedures clearly but without condescension, and made sure I was comfortable with the headset and communication system. "Any particular sites you're most interested in?" he asked as we lifted off. "I want to see everything," I said. "I want the full experience." As we rose above the coastline, the world transformed. The mansions that had looked impressive from the ground became part of a larger pattern, elegant geometric shapes nestled into the natural curves of the coast. The ocean spread out below us like polished metal, with depths that shifted from pale turquoise near the shore to deep navy blue where the continental shelf dropped away. Isabella, in the seat beside me, worked steadily with her camera, capturing both the views and my reactions to them. I wasn't performing for the camera, but I was aware that these images would someday serve as proof of what this week had been, evidence of capabilities my family had never imagined I possessed. We flew north along the coast toward Oxnard, then circled back toward Palos Verdes, covering 40 miles of coastline that showcased some of the most expensive real estate in the world. Captain Martinez pointed out celebrity homes, exclusive resorts, and geological features that had shaped this stretch of coast over millions of years. "That's your property there," he said, banking the helicopter so I could see my mansion from above. From this perspective, the house looked even more impressive than it did from ground level. The way it cascaded down the cliff face was clearly the work of an architect who understood both engineering and artistry. The infinity pool really did seem to blend with the ocean, and the landscaping created patterns and textures that were only fully visible from this aerial viewpoint. "It's stunning," Isabella said, taking multiple shots from different angles. "How long have you owned it?" 2 years, I said. "But this is the first time I've seen it from the air." "Sometimes the best view of home comes from a distance," Captain Martinez observed. As we headed back toward Santa Monica, I thought about the truth in that statement. Sometimes you had to step outside your normal perspective to really understand what you'd created, what you were capable of, who you really were when all the assumptions and limitations fell away. After the helicopter tour, we drove to Neptune's Net, a legendary seafood restaurant perched right on the Pacific Coast Highway. It wasn't elegant in the way my mansion was elegant. It was a weathered building with plastic chairs and paper plates, but the fish was caught that morning and prepared with the kind of simplicity that comes from absolute confidence in your ingredients. Isabella documented my lunch there too, capturing the contrast between the morning's luxury and this afternoon's casual perfection. I ordered fish and chips and ate them with my fingers, watching surfers and motorcyclists and families enjoying a perfect Southern California day. "This is the kind of place that never changes," I told Isabella as she photographed me enjoying the simple pleasure of outstanding food in an unpretentious setting. "I love that there are still places where what matters is quality, not presentation." "But you appreciate presentation too," she observed, nodding toward the BMW and my carefully chosen outfit. "I appreciate having choices," I said. "The luxury is wonderful when it serves a purpose, but so is this." The wine tasting at Malibu Family Wines was the perfect end to the day. The vineyard was small and family-owned, producing bottles that rarely made it outside California, because the family preferred quality over quantity. The tasting room was built into a hillside, with views across the valley toward the ocean in the distance. Marcus, the owner and winemaker, was probably my son's age, but he treated me like a serious wine enthusiast rather than a tourist who needed basic explanations. He walked me through 6 different wines, explaining the terroir and the decisions he'd made during fermentation, and he listened thoughtfully to my questions and observations. "You have a good palate," he said as I tasted a Pinot Noir that had notes I couldn't quite identify. "Are you detecting the hint of lavender?" "Most people miss that completely." "It's very subtle," I said, "almost like it's just suggested rather than actually present." "Exactly. That comes from the lavender farm about half a mile south of this vineyard. The bees cross-pollinate, and somehow that translates into the wine. It's one of those mysteries that makes winemaking more art than science." Isabella captured the entire tasting, from my focused concentration as I evaluated each wine, to my genuine delight when I discovered something unexpected. This wasn't performance or posing. This was simply documentation of a woman enjoying sophisticated pleasure she'd earned the right to experience. As the sun began to set, we drove back toward my mansion, taking the long way along the coast so Isabella could capture some final shots of the day. The light was golden and warm, turning everything it touched into something that belonged in a magazine or a movie about the perfect life. "This has been one of my favorite shoots in years," Isabella told me as we pulled into my driveway. "Usually, people hire me because they want to document wealth or status, but you seem to be documenting joy." "Maybe they're the same thing," I said. "When you've earned them both, honestly." That evening, I had dinner on the terrace while Isabella reviewed the day's photos on her laptop. The images were beautiful, but more than that, they were authentic. They showed a woman completely comfortable in luxury settings, confident in adventure activities, and genuinely engaged with every experience. They showed someone who belonged in these spaces, who had earned the right to enjoy them. My phone buzzed with another group text from Costa Rica. Day 2 was incredible. Whitewater rafting and horseback riding. Definitely not for everyone, but we're all holding up great. This time, I decided to respond. Sounds wonderful. I'm having amazing adventures here too. Just got back from a helicopter tour. I waited to see if anyone would ask for details, but the silence stretched long enough to confirm what I'd suspected. They assumed I was being polite about some modest local activity, maybe a helicopter ride over the city, or a short sightseeing tour designed for tourists. It never occurred to them that their frail elderly mother might have spent the afternoon soaring over some of the most exclusive real estate in the world, documenting the kind of adventure vacation that made their Costa Rican ziplining look like a walk in the park. As I settled into the marble soaking tub for the second night in a row, I thought about the conversations they were probably having. They'd share stories about their day's adventures, congratulate themselves on their fitness and courage, and maybe make a few gentle jokes about how glad they were that they hadn't had to worry about me keeping up. What they didn't know was that while they were congratulating themselves on activities any reasonably fit person could handle, I was living proof that 73 could be the most adventurous age of all, when financial independence met hard-earned wisdom and the confidence to stop caring what anyone else thought was appropriate. Tomorrow would bring new adventures, a private art opening in Beverly Hills, dinner at a restaurant that required months of advance reservations, and an evening at the opera that I'd been wanting to attend for years but had never prioritized when family needs came first. They wanted me to act my age. Perfect. I was about to show them exactly what acting my age looked like when it came with resources, independence, and the freedom to live exactly as magnificently as I'd always been capable of living. The morning of my third day began with a phone call that would shift everything. I was enjoying coffee on the master balcony, watching dolphins play in the surf below, when my phone rang with an unknown Beverly Hills number. Mrs. Hill? This is Jonathan Ashworth from Ashworth Gallery. I understand you're interested in attending our private collection viewing tonight. I'd almost forgotten about the art opening. My former contractor's gallery owner brother had arranged the invitation as a favor, but I hadn't expected a personal call from the owner himself. Yes, I'm very much looking forward to it, I said. Wonderful. I should mention this is quite an exclusive showing. We're unveiling a newly discovered Monet water lily painting that's been in private hands for 60 years. The guest list is very select, mostly serious collectors and museum curators. I wanted to ensure you knew what to expect. There was something in his tone that suggested he was fishing for information about my credentials as a serious art enthusiast. It occurred to me that whoever had secured my invitation might not have provided extensive background about my collecting history, mainly because I didn't have one. My art appreciation had been limited to museum visits and library books about famous painters. I appreciate the heads up, I said carefully. I'm exploring expanding into art acquisition, and I've heard excellent things about your gallery's reputation for authenticity and quality. Excellent. We'll have several pieces available for acquisition tonight, including some works by contemporary artists who are just beginning to gain recognition. Sometimes the most rewarding collecting happens when you trust your instincts about emerging talent. After he hung up, I sat staring at the ocean and realizing I'd just committed to attending an event where I'd be expected to discuss art with people who probably had decades of experience and millions of dollars invested in their collections. The confident woman who'd handled the helicopter tour and wine tasting suddenly felt out of her depth. But then I remembered who I actually was. I'd built a multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio through research, intuition, and the willingness to take calculated risks on properties other people overlooked. How different could art collecting be? Both required the ability to see potential value that others missed. Both involved understanding markets and trends. And both rewarded patience and long-term thinking. I spent the morning researching, not just reading about Monet and water lilies, but studying the current art market, learning about emerging artists, and familiarizing myself with the language and concepts that serious collectors used. I read gallery reviews, auction results, and profiles of successful collectors who'd started later in life. By noon, I felt prepared enough to be dangerous. I understood that art collection at this level was as much about relationships and intuition as it was about knowledge. I had money to spend, genuine curiosity about what I might discover, and the confidence that came from succeeding in one investment arena already. Isabella arrived at 1 o'clock to document the day's adventures. She'd brought different equipment today, cameras and lenses designed for indoor shooting and low-light situations. Art openings can be tricky to photograph, she explained as we discussed the evening's plans. Lots of people, controlled lighting, and gallery owners who sometimes have specific rules about flash photography. But I think we can capture some beautiful moments. I'm most interested in documenting my own reactions, I said. This is new territory for me, and I want to remember how it feels to discover something completely different about myself. We started the afternoon with preparations that felt like getting ready for battle, but enjoyable battle. I'd purchased a new outfit specifically for tonight. A black silk dress that was elegant without being ostentatious, paired with vintage jewelry I'd inherited from my mother but rarely had occasion to wear. The overall effect was sophisticated wealth rather than flashy display. Isabella documented the transformation, capturing the careful attention I paid to each detail. This wasn't vanity. It was strategy. In environments where people made instant judgments based on appearance and presence, looking like I belonged was part of the admission price. You're approaching this very thoughtfully, Isabella observed as she photographed me putting on my mother's pearl earrings. Like you're preparing for something important. I am, I said. I'm preparing to discover what kind of art collector I might become. We drove to Beverly Hills in the late afternoon, taking the scenic route through the canyons so Isabella could capture the journey as well as the destination. The BMW handled the winding roads effortlessly, and I found myself thinking about how different this felt from my usual drives through suburban Atlanta traffic. The gallery was located on Rodeo Drive, in a building that looked like it had been designed to house precious things. The exterior was understated elegance, with clean lines and expensive materials that suggested serious money without ostentation. Through the large windows, I could see people beginning to gather for the private viewing. Are you nervous? Isabella asked as we parked. Excited, I said, surprised to realize it was true. I don't know what I'm going to discover tonight, but I have a feeling it's going to be significant. Inside, the gallery was everything I'd expected and more. The lighting was perfect, designed to make each piece look its absolute best without overwhelming the viewer. The space itself was large enough to display major works without crowding, but intimate enough to encourage close examination of details. The Monet was stunning, but it was one of the contemporary pieces that caught my attention immediately. A large canvas covered in what looked like layers of translucent color, applied in a way that created depth and movement without obvious brushstrokes. Standing in front of it, I felt something I'd never experienced with art before, a sense of recognition, as if the painting was showing me something I'd always known but never articulated. That's interesting, said a voice behind me. I turned to find a woman about my age, elegantly dressed but with paint under her fingernails. Most people walk right past Sarah Martinez's work. They're looking for names they recognize. It's beautiful, I said simply. It makes me think of looking down through clear water, seeing layers of sand and rock and seaweed, but also seeing the surface reflecting sky. The woman smiled. I'm Sarah Martinez. And that's exactly what I was trying to capture. The piece is called Tidal Pools at Dawn, and you're the first person tonight who's seen what I was actually painting. We talked for nearly an hour. Sarah was 68, a former marine biologist who'd started painting seriously only after her retirement from UCLA. Her work was inspired by her decades of studying coastal ecosystems, and she approached art with the same careful observation she'd once applied to scientific research. The gallery is featuring my work because Jonathan believes scientists who become artists bring a different perspective, she explained. We see patterns and relationships that pure artists might miss, but we also understand the emotional impact of natural beauty in a way that pure scientists might not capture. I found myself genuinely engaged with both her art and her story. Here was someone who'd made a major life transition later in life, who'd discovered a new passion and pursued it with the confidence that came from maturity rather than youth. She was living proof that 70 wasn't 3 didn't mean settling for smaller dreams. "Are you a collector?" Sarah asked. "I'm becoming one," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "Starting tonight, actually." Jonathan Ashworth appeared at my elbow as if summoned. "Mrs. Hill, I see you've discovered one of our most exciting emerging artists. Sarah's work has been gaining recognition very quickly. Several museum curators have expressed interest, and her prices are still quite reasonable for someone of her caliber." I looked at the painting again, seeing not just the beauty that had initially attracted me but also the investment potential. Sarah was talented, her story was compelling, and she was creating work that would only become more valuable as people discovered the unique perspective she brought to contemporary art. "I'd like to purchase this piece," I said, and watched both Sarah and Jonathan register surprise at how quickly I'd made the decision. "Wonderful," Jonathan said, immediately shifting into professional mode. "Let me show you some of her other pieces as well. We have 3 Martinez works in tonight's showing." Isabella had been documenting the entire conversation from a respectful distance, capturing my genuine engagement with the art and the moment of decision. Later, when I looked at these photos, I would see something I hadn't been aware of in the moment. I looked like someone who belonged in this environment, someone whose opinion carried weight, and whose financial backing could make a difference to an emerging artist. I ended up purchasing 2 of Sarah's paintings and a small sculpture by another artist whose work reminded me of the rock formations along the Malibu coast. The total was more than I'd ever spent on anything purely aesthetic, but it felt like an investment in beauty and in my own expanding sense of what was possible. "First art purchases?" Sarah asked as Jonathan arranged for shipping and insurance. "Yes, but I don't think they'll be my last," I said. "This is addictive." The best collecting always is. You're not just buying objects, you're building relationships with artists, and with your own taste. Every piece you choose tells you something about who you are. As the evening wound down, Jonathan introduced me to several other gallery owners and collectors, each conversation adding to my understanding of this world I was entering. I exchanged business cards and accepted invitations to future viewings, building a network that could support continued exploration of art collection. "You have excellent instincts," one curator told me. "Sarah Martinez is going to be very important in contemporary art." Getting in early with her work was a smart decision. Driving back to Malibu, I felt the satisfaction that came from stepping successfully into unfamiliar territory. I'd gone into the evening as someone pretending to be an art collector, and left as someone who actually was one. The paintings I'd purchased weren't just beautiful objects, they were proof that I could trust my instincts in completely new areas. "That was incredible to witness," Isabella said as we reviewed some of the evening's photos on her camera. "You went from observer to participant to buyer to genuine member of that community in the space of 3 hours. I've spent so many years being cautious about everything except real estate," I said. "Tonight I remembered what it feels like to trust my judgment completely." My phone had been buzzing periodically throughout the evening with messages from my family in Costa Rica. When I finally checked them, I found a series of updates about their adventures: rappelling down waterfalls, night hiking through the rainforest, swimming in natural pools that required strenuous hikes to reach. Marcus had sent a photo of the whole group looking tired but triumphant after a day of adventure activities. The caption read, "Another amazing day of challenges that definitely wouldn't have been appropriate for everyone. So glad we could all keep up." I showed the photo to Isabella, who was driving while I reviewed messages. "They look like they're having fun," she said diplomatically. "They are. And they're convinced they're having adventures. I couldn't handle." I typed a response. "Sounds wonderful. I had an amazing day too. Just bought my first serious art collection pieces at a private gallery opening in Beverly Hills." I sent the message and waited to see if anyone would ask for details. But as usual, the silence suggested they assumed I was exaggerating or describing something much more modest than reality. The next morning brought a call from Tom, Robert's brother, who was the only family member who knew about my real financial situation. "Terry, I just got the strangest call from Marcus," he said without preamble. "He's worried that you might be spending money you don't have on vacation activities. Apparently you mentioned buying art?" I did buy art, I said, settling into the chair on my balcony with my morning coffee. 2 paintings and a sculpture from emerging artists at a private gallery opening. Good for you. But Marcus seems to think you might be overextending yourself financially. He asked me to check on you, make sure you're not getting taken advantage of by predatory businesses that target seniors. I had to laugh at that. Predatory art galleries targeting elderly women with limited incomes? That's what he's worried about. He thinks you might be trying to live beyond your means because you're feeling left out of their vacation. Tom, do you want to know what I spent on art last night? If you want to tell me. I told him the figure, and the silence on his end stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Terry, that's more than Marcus makes in 6 months. I know exactly what Marcus makes. I also know what all of them make, what their mortgages cost, and how much they're spending on this Costa Rica vacation that was too expensive and too physically demanding for their elderly mother. So what are you doing? Making a point? I'm living my life, Tom. For the first time in years, I'm living exactly the life I can afford to live, doing exactly the things I want to do, without worrying about anyone else's comfort or assumptions. And when are you planning to tell them about the real estate empire? Maybe never. Maybe when they're ready to see me as something other than a burden to be managed carefully. Maybe when they stop treating my age like a disability and my independence like a problem to be solved. After I hung up, I spent the morning thinking about Tom's question. When was I planning to reveal the truth about my financial situation? And more importantly, what did I want that revelation to accomplish? I'd started this week simply wanting to prove to myself that I could enjoy the adventures my family thought were beyond my capabilities. But somewhere between the helicopter tour and the art gallery opening, the goal had shifted. I was discovering not just that I could handle adventure, but that I could thrive in environments my family had never imagined I belonged in. The question now was whether that discovery was for my own satisfaction, or whether it was preparation for a larger revelation that would change our family dynamic permanently. Isabella arrived at noon to document the day's spa experience at the sanctuary at Jade Mountain. The spa was located in the hills above Malibu, accessible only by a winding private road that ended at a facility that looked more like a luxury resort than a place of business. The intake process alone was more thorough than most medical appointments I'd experienced. A consultant named Elena spent 45 minutes discussing my health history, stress levels, physical activities, and goals for the day's treatments. She explained each available service with the kind of detailed knowledge that suggested years of training in both wellness and luxury hospitality. For someone with your activity level and overall health, I'd recommend our signature Pacific Renewal package, Elena said, reviewing notes she'd taken during our consultation. It begins with a seaweed wrap using organic kelp harvested from local waters, followed by a hot stone massage, facial treatment with marine-based products, and concludes with hydrotherapy in our mineral pools overlooking the ocean. The entire experience was designed to make me feel pampered and rejuvenated, but more than that, it was designed to make me feel worthy of pampering. Every staff member treated me like someone accustomed to luxury, someone whose comfort and satisfaction were their primary concerns. Isabella documented the experience discreetly, capturing my genuine relaxation and pleasure without intruding on the private moments. The photos would later show a woman completely at ease with luxury, someone who looked like she belonged in these exclusive environments. I've never felt this relaxed, I told Elena during the final hydrotherapy session, floating in a mineral pool that overlooked the Pacific while the afternoon sun warmed my face. Stress accumulates over years, she said. Most people don't realize how much tension they carry until they finally let it go. You seem like someone who's been taking care of other people for a long time. My whole adult life, I admitted, and now you're taking care of yourself. That's not selfish, that's necessary. You can't pour from an empty cup. As we drove back toward my mansion, I felt physically renewed but also emotionally clarified. The spa experience had created a kind of meditative space where I could think clearly about what I wanted this week to accomplish, and what I wanted my life to look like going forward. You look different, Isabella observed as she reviewed the day's photos, more peaceful, but also more determined. I feel like I'm remembering who I used to be before I became so focused on everyone else's needs, I said. Or maybe I'm discovering who I could have been all along if I'd given myself permission. That evening, I had dinner reservations at Nobu Malibu, a restaurant where tables were booked months in advance, and celebrities considered it their private dining room. I'd been looking forward to this experience as much as any other part of the week. The restaurant was everything I'd expected: stunning oceanfront location, impeccable service, and food that was as much art as cuisine. But what surprised me was how comfortable I felt in this environment. The other diners included people I recognized from magazine covers and television shows, but I didn't feel intimidated or out of place. Isabella captured my dinner experience, documenting both the extraordinary food and my natural ease in these surroundings. When I looked at these photos later, I would see someone who belonged in exclusive restaurants, someone whose presence added to rather than detracted from the sophisticated atmosphere. The yellowtail sashimi is prepared with a jalapeno and citrus sauce that's been a signature here for years, my server explained as he presented each course. Chef Nobu personally developed this recipe, and it's never been shared with other restaurants. I tasted it slowly, appreciating both the complex flavors and the privilege of experiencing something truly unique. This wasn't just expensive food. It was culinary artistry that few people ever had the opportunity to taste. Halfway through dinner, my phone buzzed with another group text from Costa Rica. This one included a video of my family whitewater rafting, with everyone screaming and laughing as they navigated rapids that looked genuinely challenging. David had added a comment: "Day 4 adventures. Definitely glad we didn't have to worry about anyone not being able to handle the physical demands." I watched the video twice, noting that they all looked tired but exhilarated. They were having exactly the kind of adventure vacation they'd wanted, and they were clearly enjoying themselves, without having to accommodate what they perceived as my limitations. Instead of feeling hurt by the obvious reference to my absence, I felt something unexpected: gratitude. Their decision to exclude me had given me the opportunity to discover capabilities and interests I might never have explored if I'd been focused on keeping up with their idea of appropriate adventure. I typed back, "Looks amazing. I'm having incredible adventures here too. Just finished an unbelievable dinner at Nobu." The food was indescribable. Again, silence. Either they were busy with evening activities, or they assumed I was describing some modest local restaurant that happened to share a name with the famous establishment. As I finished dinner with a dessert that was almost too beautiful to eat, I made a decision about the rest of the week. I was going to stop monitoring their reactions to my updates. I was going to stop measuring my experiences against their assumptions. I was going to focus entirely on discovering what else I was capable of enjoying, learning, and becoming. Tomorrow would bring the opera performance I'd been anticipating, followed by a private yacht excursion that would take me along the same coastline I'd seen from the helicopter, but from water level where I could experience the ocean itself, rather than just observing it from above. The woman who'd started this week wanting to prove she wasn't too old for adventure was evolving into someone who was proving there was no such thing as too old for anything, as long as you had the resources, the courage, and the willingness to step outside other people's expectations of what your life should look like. As Isabella and I drove back to the mansion, I realized that this week wasn't just about having experiences my family thought I couldn't handle. It was about discovering that the person they thought I was, the elderly mother living on a modest pension who needed to be protected from physical challenges, was only one small part of who I actually was. The real Terry Hill was someone who could succeed in real estate investment, appreciate fine art, enjoy luxury experiences, and handle any adventure she chose to pursue. The question now was whether my family would ever be ready to meet this version of their mother, and whether I was ready to let them. The morning of day 5 brought an unexpected development that would reshape the entire trajectory of my week. I was enjoying breakfast on the terrace when Vivian called with news that made me sit up straighter in my chair. "Mrs. Hill, I hope I'm not disturbing you, but I wanted to let you know about an opportunity that's just come up." The Meridian, that new ultra-luxury yacht, had a last-minute cancellation for tomorrow's full-day charter. The captain called me because he knows I work with discerning clients, and he'd rather not lose the day entirely. "Would you be interested in a private yacht experience along the coast?" I'd heard of the Meridian, It was featured in luxury lifestyle magazines as one of the most exclusive charter vessels on the West Coast, typically booked months in advance by tech billionaires and entertainment industry moguls. The day rate was astronomical, but the experience was supposed to be unparalleled. "What kind of experience are we talking about?" I asked. "Full cruise service, gourmet chef, water sports equipment, helicopter landing pad if you want to combine experiences. They can customize the itinerary completely based on your interests. Some clients prefer gentle coastal cruising with wine and dining. Others want adventure activities like deep-sea fishing or diving. The boat is equipped for anything." I thought about my family, probably waking up in their Costa Rican resort, preparing for another day of activities they deemed too challenging for their elderly mother. Meanwhile, I had the opportunity to experience luxury ocean adventure at a level they couldn't even imagine. "Book it," I said without hesitation. "Full day, complete experience." "Excellent. Captain Rodriguez will call you this afternoon to discuss preferences and logistics." "And Mrs. Hill? You're going to have an extraordinary day." Isabella arrived early to help plan the yacht photography. She'd worked on luxury vessels before and understood both the opportunities and challenges of documenting experiences on the water. "The lighting can be incredible, but also unpredictable," she explained as we reviewed her equipment. "Ocean reflections, changing weather, movement of the boat. But when it works, the photos are spectacular, very cinematic." "I want to capture everything," I said. "This feels like it's going to be the pinnacle experience of the week." "What's made this week so special?" she asked as she prepared her gear. "I've photographed a lot of luxury vacations, but there's something different about this one. You seem like you're not just experiencing these things, you're claiming them." It was an astute observation. I had been claiming these experiences, asserting my right to enjoy them, proving to myself that age was no barrier to adventure or luxury or new discoveries. But I was also building evidence of a life my family had never imagined I was capable of living. "I'm proving something," I said finally. "Maybe to myself, maybe to other people, maybe both." Captain Rodriguez called that afternoon as promised. His voice carried the authority and confidence that came from years of managing luxury experiences for demanding clients. "Mrs. Hill, I understand you're interested in tomorrow's charter. Let me tell you what we can offer, and then we'll customize based on what appeals to you most." He described possibilities that sounded like fantasies: helicopter transfers to remote coves, underwater dining experiences, deep-sea fishing for species most people only saw in nature documentaries, swimming with dolphins in protected marine sanctuaries. "What's your comfort level with water activities?" he asked. "Some clients prefer to stay dry and enjoy the views. Others want full water immersion experiences. I'm a strong swimmer and I'm interested in everything," I said. "I want the most complete ocean experience possible." "Perfect. We'll plan a day that includes both gentle and adventurous elements. The weather forecast is ideal. Calm seas with excellent visibility for any underwater activities you might want to try." That evening, I attended the opera performance I'd been anticipating all week. The Los Angeles Opera was presenting a production of La Traviata that had received rave reviews, and my tickets were for a private box that offered perfect acoustics and sightlines. Isabella accompanied me to document this cultural experience, though opera photography required different skills than anything else we'd done this week. The lighting was dramatic but controlled, the environment was formal but intimate, and the focus needed to be on emotional response rather than action. I'd chosen an evening gown for the occasion, midnight blue silk that had required professional alteration to achieve the perfect fit. With my mother's diamond necklace and evening bag, I looked like someone who belonged in opera boxes, someone for whom cultural sophistication was a natural part of life. The performance was transcendent. Violetta's journey from courtesan to tragic heroine resonated in ways I hadn't expected, particularly her struggle to be seen as more than what society expected her to be. During the second act, when she sang about sacrificing her own happiness for respectability, I felt tears I hadn't anticipated. "That was powerful," Isabella whispered during intermission, showing me some of the photos she'd captured of my emotional response to the music. "I wasn't expecting it to affect me so deeply," I admitted. "There's something about stories of women being underestimated, having to prove their worth over and over. During the final act, as Violetta faced her tragic end with dignity and courage, I thought about my own story. Not tragic, certainly, but involving its own struggle to be seen and valued for who I really was rather than what other people assumed about my capabilities and worth. The standing ovation at the end felt personal, as if the audience was applauding not just the performers, but the recognition that great art could transform anyone willing to be open to the experience. How did that compare to your expectations? Isabella asked as we made our way through the elegant lobby afterward. It exceeded them completely. I thought I was coming for cultural experience, but I got emotional revelation instead. We drove back to Malibu through the city lights, the BMW handling the curves of the canyon roads with effortless precision. I felt sophisticated in a way that had nothing to do with money, and everything to do with expanding my understanding of what life could offer when you were brave enough to seek experiences outside your comfort zone. My phone had been silent all evening, which was unusual. When I checked it, I found a series of messages from my family that explained the quiet. They were dealing with a minor crisis that put their adventure vacation into perspective. Patricia had sent a group message. Update on Mom's situation. Marcus got food poisoning this morning and has been sick all day. We spent most of the day at a medical clinic instead of doing planned activities. He's feeling better now, but pretty wiped out. Makes you realize how quickly adventure can turn into something else entirely. Rachel had added, reminded us that we're not as young as we think we are. Maybe we should have planned something less demanding. David's response was the most telling. At least we didn't have to worry about Mom dealing with this kind of situation. Can you imagine trying to handle medical emergencies in a foreign country with someone her age? I stared at that message for a long time. Even when they were the ones experiencing health problems during their supposedly vigorous adventure vacation, they were congratulating themselves for not having to worry about my well-being. The irony was almost perfect. I typed a careful response. Sorry to hear about Marcus's illness. Hope he feels better soon. I'm having a wonderful evening at the opera. La Traviata was absolutely stunning. This time Patricia responded quickly. Glad you're having a nice quiet evening, Mom. Much better than being stuck in foreign medical facilities. I didn't correct her assumption that opera attendance qualified as a quiet evening. Let them think I was having sedate cultural experiences, while they dealt with the reality that adventure travel came with risks for people of any age. The next morning dawned with the kind of perfect California weather that made you understand why people paid millions of dollars to live near the ocean. Clear skies, gentle breeze, and water so blue it looked artificial. Isabella and I drove to Marina del Rey, where the Meridian was docked. Even from a distance, the yacht was impressive. Sleek white lines, multiple decks, and equipment that suggested serious water sports capabilities. As we got closer, the scale became apparent. This wasn't just a boat. It was a floating luxury resort. Captain Rodriguez met us at the dock, a man in his 50s with the kind of deep tan and relaxed confidence that came from years of maritime experience. His crew of 4 was already preparing for departure, moving with the efficient coordination of professionals who took pride in their work. Mrs. Hill, welcome aboard the Meridian, he said, offering his hand to help me step onto the deck. We've planned an extraordinary day for you. The main salon was appointed with the kind of understated luxury that spoke of serious money rather than flashy display. Cream leather seating, polished wood details, and windows that offered panoramic ocean views. The dining area could seat 12 comfortably, and the bar was stocked with premium spirits I recognized from my wine tasting experiences. We'll begin with coastal cruising while you get comfortable with the boat, Captain Rodriguez explained as we settled into the main salon. Then we'll anchor in a protected cove for water activities if you're interested. Chef Gabriel has prepared a lunch menu featuring locally caught seafood, and we have champagne chilled for whenever you'd like to celebrate. What kind of water activities? I asked. We have snorkeling equipment, paddle boards, kayaks, and if you're feeling adventurous, scuba gear with a certified dive master. The water visibility today is exceptional, and we know some spots where the marine life is spectacular. As we pulled away from the marina, I stood on the forward deck feeling the ocean breeze and watching Los Angeles recede behind us. From this perspective, the city looked different. Smaller, less overwhelming, just one part of a much larger landscape that included mountains and desert and endless ocean. Isabella worked steadily, capturing both the yacht's luxury and my obvious enjoyment of the experience. The photos would later show a woman completely at ease on a multi-million-dollar vessel, someone who looked like she belonged in this rarefied environment. "Have you done much boating?" Captain Rodriguez asked as we settled into our cruising speed. "Some, but nothing like this. This is extraordinary." The Meridian was designed for people who want to experience the ocean without compromising on comfort or safety. We can handle weather that would send smaller boats running for harbor, but we also have the stability and amenities to make calm water cruising a luxury experience. As we moved along the coast, he pointed out landmarks and celebrity homes, shared stories about memorable charters, and explained the technical aspects of operating a vessel this sophisticated. His knowledge was encyclopedic, covering everything from marine biology to local history to the economics of luxury tourism. "Your property is coming up on the starboard side," he said as we approached the stretch of coastline where my mansion was located. From this perspective, the house looked even more impressive than it had from the helicopter. The way it cascaded down the cliff face was architectural poetry, and the infinity pool really did seem to blend seamlessly with the ocean beyond. "That's a remarkable property," Captain Rodriguez observed. "One of the finest examples of contemporary coastal architecture I've seen. Do you know anything about the owners?" "A little," I said, fighting back a smile. "I understand they have excellent taste." Isabella captured several photos of me with my mansion in the background, images that would serve as perfect evidence of the life I'd been living while my family worried about my ability to handle adventure travel. We anchored in a secluded cove near Point de Mai, where the water was so clear I could see the sandy bottom 20 feet below. Chef Gabriel served lunch on the aft deck: lobster salad with avocado and citrus, seared ahi tuna with wasabi aioli, and grilled vegetables that had been marinated in herbs I couldn't identify, but that created flavors I'd never experienced. "This is incredible," I told him as I tasted the tuna. "Where did you train?" "Le Cordon Bleu in Paris, then several years working on private yachts in the Mediterranean." Cooking on boats presents unique challenges, but also opportunities. Fresh seafood, creative constraints, intimate dining experiences. I love the creativity it requires. After lunch, I decided to try snorkeling, despite having no recent experience with underwater exploration. The dive master, a woman named Carolina who'd been swimming in these waters for over a decade, provided instruction and equipment. "The key is relaxation," she explained as she helped me adjust the mask and fins. "Let the water support you, breathe normally through the snorkel, and just observe. The marine life here is incredible if you're patient." The underwater world was a revelation. Schools of bright orange fish moved in perfect coordination, sea anemones swayed in the gentle current, and the kelp forest created cathedral-like spaces filled with filtered sunlight. I floated on the surface, breathing through the snorkel, completely absorbed in this alien environment. Isabella, working with waterproof equipment, captured my snorkeling experience from both above and below the waterline. The photos would later show a 73-year-old woman completely comfortable in ocean water, exploring marine environments with the curiosity and confidence of an experienced adventurer. "You're a natural," Carolina said when I finally surfaced after nearly an hour of exploration. "Most people are nervous about breathing underwater, but you adapted immediately." "It's like discovering a completely different planet," I said, floating on my back and looking up at the yacht. I had no idea this world existed so close to shore. We spent the afternoon exploring different coves and underwater environments. I tried paddleboarding, which required balance and core strength that surprised even me. I kayaked into sea caves where the acoustics turned every splash into music. I even attempted some basic scuba diving, breathing underwater with equipment while Carolina guided me through underwater rock formations. "You've got excellent instincts for this," she told me as we returned to the yacht after the scuba experience. "Most beginners are anxious about breathing apparatus, but you seemed completely comfortable." "I think I've been underestimating myself for years," I said, and realized it was the truest thing I'd said all week. As afternoon moved toward evening, Captain Rodriguez suggested we cruise south toward Palos Verdes for the sunset. The water was calm, the light was golden, and the yacht moved through the swells with barely perceptible motion. Chef Gabriel prepared dinner as we cruised: grilled swordfish with Mediterranean herbs, risotto with local uni, and a wine selection that perfectly complemented the seafood. We ate on the upper deck as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. "This has been one of the most memorable days of my life," I told Captain Rodriguez as we watched the sky turn orange and pink. "That's what we hope for every charter," he replied. "But there's something special about guests who really embrace the experience. You've tried everything we offered, asked intelligent questions, and genuinely appreciated both the luxury and the adventure elements." My phone had been buzzing periodically throughout the day with updates from Costa Rica. When I finally checked the messages during dinner, I found a series of posts about Marcus's continued recovery and their decision to modify their remaining activities to accommodate his reduced energy level. David had sent a photo of the group lounging by the resort pool with the caption, "Taking it easy today. Sometimes the best adventures are the quiet ones." The irony was almost too perfect. While they were having a quiet pool day because one member of their group couldn't handle the physical demands of their vacation, I was completing a day of ocean adventures that would challenge people half my age. I considered sharing photos from my yacht experience, but decided against it. Let them think I was having whatever kind of vacation they imagined elderly women had. The documentation Isabella was creating would serve as evidence when the time was right for revelations. As we headed back toward Marina del Rey in the gathering darkness, I stood on the forward deck watching the lights of the coast grow brighter. The day had been everything Vivian had promised and more, but it had also been something I hadn't expected. A complete transformation of my understanding of what I was capable of experiencing and enjoying. "You look different than when we started this morning," Isabella observed, joining me at the rail. "I feel different. More confident. More adventurous. More like the person I might have been all along if I hadn't been so focused on what other people thought was appropriate." "What happens when you go back to your regular life?" It was a question I'd been avoiding all week. This week had been extraordinary, but it was also temporary. Eventually, I'd return to my modest apartment, resume my careful financial habits, and reconnect with family members who saw me as their elderly mother in need of protection, rather than a woman capable of luxury adventures. "I'm not sure I can go back to my regular life," I said finally. "Not entirely. This week has shown me possibilities I didn't know existed." "Maybe that was the point," Isabella said. "Maybe this wasn't just a vacation. Maybe it was research into who you really are when all the limitations fall away." As we docked at Marina del Rey, I thanked Captain Rodriguez and his crew for an experience that had exceeded every expectation. The Meridian had been more than a luxury yacht. It had been a platform for discovering capabilities I'd never tested and pleasures I'd never imagined. "I hope we'll see you again," Captain Rodriguez said as I prepared to disembark. "You're exactly the kind of guest who makes this work. Rewarding. Someone who appreciates both the craftsmanship and the adventure." Driving back to Malibu, I reflected on how much had changed in just 5 days. I'd gone from being someone whose family thought needed protection from physical challenges to someone who'd successfully handled ocean adventures that most people would consider demanding, regardless of age. But more than that, I'd discovered that the financial independence I'd been building quietly for years wasn't just about security. It was about freedom, the freedom to choose experiences based on my own interests, rather than other people's assumptions about what was appropriate for someone my age. Tomorrow would bring the final day of my week-long revelation. I'd planned something that would serve as the perfect culmination of everything I'd learned about myself: a private helicopter flight to a remote luxury resort in the mountains, followed by activities that would definitively prove that 73 was just a number when it came with resources, confidence, and the willingness to embrace adventure. My family would return from Costa Rica in 2 days, probably with stories about how their adventure vacation had been exactly the right level of challenge for younger, more capable travelers. They'd ask polite questions about my quiet week at home, and I'd have a choice to make: continue letting them underestimate me, or reveal exactly what their supposedly frail elderly mother had been doing while they were congratulating themselves on their adventurous spirit. The evidence Isabella had been collecting all week would give me options. Photos of yacht adventures, art collection acquisitions, helicopter tours, luxury dining, and ocean sports that proved beyond any doubt that age was no barrier to anything when it came with the right resources and attitude. The question was whether I was ready to change our family dynamic permanently, or whether I preferred to keep this extraordinary life as my private secret while continuing to play the role they expected from me. As I settled into the marble-soaking tub for what might be my last night in this oceanfront paradise, I realized that the decision about revelation wasn't really about them. It was about whether I was ready to live as the person I'd discovered myself to be this week, or whether I wanted to return to the smaller, safer version of myself that had kept family peace for so many years. One more day would give me the answer. The final morning of my extraordinary week arrived with a clarity that felt almost symbolic. The marine layer had burned off early, leaving pristine blue skies and unlimited visibility that stretched to the Channel Islands. As I stood on my master balcony with coffee, watching dolphins surface and dive in the distance, I felt the weight of the decision I'd been avoiding all week. Today's adventure would be the most ambitious yet, a helicopter flight to Ventana Big Sur, an ultra-exclusive resort nestled in the mountains 2 hours north of Malibu, where I'd reserved their most luxurious suite for an overnight stay. The resort was legendary among luxury travelers, accessible only by helicopter or a treacherous mountain road that few guests attempted. It offered experiences that redefined the concept of adventure luxury: guided meditation on cliff edges, private hot springs carved into mountainsides, and hiking trails that required both fitness and courage. But first I had a different kind of appointment. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a concierge physician who specialized in executive health assessments, was arriving at 10 to conduct the comprehensive physical evaluation I'd requested. Not because I had health concerns, but because I wanted definitive medical documentation of my fitness level for the conversations that were coming. Isabella arrived early to document this final day, bringing additional equipment she'd rented specifically for mountain and helicopter photography. She'd been as invested in this week's journey as I had, understanding that we were creating more than vacation photos. We were building evidence of capabilities that would reshape how I saw myself and how I chose to be seen by others. "This feels different from the other days," she observed as we reviewed the day's schedule. "More decisive somehow." "Because it is," I said. "Today isn't just about having adventures. It's about making choices that will determine what my life looks like going forward." Dr. Vasquez arrived precisely on time, a woman in her 40s with the kind of professional competence that inspired immediate confidence. She'd brought portable diagnostic equipment that could conduct hospital-quality assessments in my mansion's living room. "Mrs. Hill, I understand you're interested in a comprehensive fitness evaluation. Is this for insurance purposes, or are you planning specific activities that require medical clearance?" "I'm planning to live my life without limitations," I said. "And I want medical documentation of exactly what my body is capable of handling." The evaluation was thorough. Cardiovascular stress testing, flexibility assessments, balance evaluations, bone density measurements, and cognitive function testing. Dr. Vasquez worked with the systematic attention to detail that marked her as someone accustomed to high-stakes medical consultations. "Your cardiovascular health is remarkable," she said as she reviewed the stress test results. "Heart rate recovery, blood pressure response, and endurance capacity are all consistent with someone 20 years younger. Do you maintain a regular exercise routine?" 5 miles of walking every morning, plus whatever adventures present themselves," I said, thinking about the week's activities that my family had deemed too challenging for someone my age. "Well, whatever you're doing is working. Your balance and coordination scores are in the top percentile for any age group, and your bone density is excellent. Cognitively, you're sharp as a tack. From a medical standpoint, I'd clear you for any activity you're interested in pursuing." She prepared a detailed report documenting my physical and mental fitness, complete with recommendations for continued adventure activities and comparative data showing how my health metrics compared to various age groups. The document would serve as irrefutable evidence that age was not a limiting factor in my case. "Can I ask what's prompting this evaluation?" Dr. Vasquez said as she packed up her equipment. "I'm preparing to have some conversations with my family about what I'm capable of," I said. And I want facts rather than assumptions to guide those discussions. By noon, the helicopter was waiting at a private helipad 20 minutes from my mansion. Captain Lisa Chen, a former military pilot who specialized in luxury adventure transport, greeted me with the kind of professional respect that suggested she'd researched her passenger in advance. "Mrs. Hill, I understand you're interested in the full mountain experience today. The flight to Ventana Big Sur is spectacular, and the resort has arranged some unique activities for your stay." The helicopter was larger and more sophisticated than the coastal tour aircraft, equipped for longer flights and mountain landing in challenging conditions. As we lifted off and headed north along the coastline before turning inland toward the Santa Lucia Mountains, I felt the familiar thrill of perspective that came with seeing the world from above. Isabella, secured in the seat beside me with specialized aviation photography equipment, captured both the journey and my obvious enjoyment of the experience. The photos would later show a woman completely comfortable in a luxury helicopter, someone whose confidence suggested this was normal rather than extraordinary. The flight itself was breathtaking. We followed the coastline past Hearst Castle, then turned inland toward mountains that rose dramatically from the ocean. The landscape below was a patchwork of vineyards, wilderness areas, and exclusive estates that were accessible only by private aircraft or treacherous mountain roads. Ventana Big Sur is located on a ridge that's completely isolated from road access, Captain Chen explained through the headset. The resort built a helipad specifically to serve guests who want ultimate privacy and natural beauty without compromising on luxury. As the resort came into view, I understood why it commanded the prices and reputation it did. The buildings seemed to grow organically from the mountainside, constructed with materials and techniques that harmonized with, rather than dominated, the natural environment. The main lodge was built around enormous redwood trees that had been incorporated into the architecture, and the guest accommodations were scattered across the ridge in a way that ensured complete privacy for each suite. "Your suite is the redwood canopy," Captain Chen said as we approached the landing pad. "It's built around a grove of old-growth trees and has a private hot spring that's fed by natural geothermal activity. The resort considers it their most exclusive accommodation." We landed smoothly on a helipad that seemed to float among the treetops. Resort staff appeared immediately to handle luggage and provide assistance, moving with the kind of coordinated efficiency that marked truly luxury operations. Emma Rodriguez, the resort's guest experience director, met me as I stepped from the helicopter. She was probably my daughter's age, but she treated me with the respectful attention usually reserved for VIP guests, whose satisfaction was crucial to the resort's reputation. "Mrs. Hill, welcome to Ventana Big Sur. We've prepared a personalized itinerary based on your interests, but everything is completely flexible. Some guests prefer meditation and spa treatments, others want hiking and adventure activities. We're equipped for anything." The Redwood Canopy Suite was extraordinary. Built on multiple levels that followed the natural contours of the ridge, it offered panoramic views of the Pacific Ocean 40 miles to the west and the Salinas Valley to the east. The main living area was constructed around 3 massive redwood trees that grew through the center of the space, their trunks serving as both architectural elements and natural art installations. The bedroom opened onto a private deck where a hot spring had been channeled into a natural rock pool that looked like it had existed for centuries. Steam rose from the mineral-rich water, and the only sounds were wind in the redwood branches and distant ocean waves. "This is incredible," I told Emma as we toured the suite. "I feel like I'm living inside a nature documentary." That's exactly the experience we're trying to create. Luxury that enhances, rather than competes with the natural environment. Your hot spring is fed by the same geothermal system that the Native Americans used for centuries before this area was developed. Isabella spent an hour documenting the suite and its spectacular setting, capturing both the luxury amenities and the way they integrated with the ancient forest. The photos would later show a woman completely at ease in environments that most people would consider intimidating both financially and physically. "The afternoon activity I'd recommend is our guided cliff meditation experience," Emma continued. "It's led by David Kim, a mindfulness instructor who's worked with everyone from tech CEOs to Olympic athletes. The meditation platform is positioned on a cliff edge that offers incredible ocean views, but it does require a moderate hike to reach. How moderate? I asked. About 2 miles on mountain trails, with some elevation gain. The path is well maintained, but it does require sure footing and reasonable fitness levels. I thought about my family, probably spending their final day in Costa Rica recovering from Marcus's illness, and the realization that their adventure vacation had been more challenging than anticipated. Meanwhile, I was being offered mountain hiking experiences at elevations that would test anyone's fitness level. That sounds perfect, I said. The hike to the meditation platform exceeded my expectations in every way. The trail wound through old-growth redwood groves, where the trees were so massive they created cathedral-like spaces between their trunks. David Kim, our guide, moved with the easy confidence of someone who'd spent years exploring these mountains, but he was also attentive to my pace and comfort level without being condescending. Most people assume meditation requires sitting still in quiet spaces, he said as we climbed through a section where the trail offered glimpses of the ocean through the trees. But some of the most profound mindfulness experiences happen when you're physically challenged and surrounded by natural grandeur. The meditation platform was built into a cliff face that dropped away dramatically toward the ocean. The engineering required to create this safe space in such a precarious location was impressive, but the effect was magical. Sitting in meditation pose with nothing between you and the infinite Pacific except 40 miles of air. The key is finding balance between awareness of the dramatic setting and inner focus, David explained as we settled into position on cushions placed near the platform's edge. Let the view inform your meditation, rather than distract from it. For 30 minutes, I sat in silence watching clouds cast shadows on the ocean far below, while focusing on breath and heartbeat, and the sensation of mountain wind on my face. Isabella worked discreetly with long lenses, capturing the experience without interrupting the meditative process. When the session ended, I felt more centered and clear than I had in years. Not just relaxed, but genuinely at peace with both the adventure experiences I'd been having and the decisions I needed to make about revealing them to my family. How was that? David asked as we prepared for the return hike. Transformative, I said, and meant it completely. The evening brought another extraordinary experience. A private dinner prepared by the resort's Michelin-starred chef, and served on my suite's deck while I soaked in the natural hot spring. The meal was a celebration of local ingredients, prepared with techniques that elevated simple elements into artistic perfection. Chef Michael Santos had trained in some of the world's best restaurants before choosing to work in this remote location, because it allowed him to source ingredients that weren't available anywhere else. Wild mushrooms foraged from the surrounding forests, seafood caught that morning from the coast below, and vegetables grown in the resort's organic gardens created flavors that couldn't be replicated in urban restaurants. This is like tasting the landscape itself, I told him as I tried a soup made from sea beans and local abalone. That's exactly what I'm trying to achieve. Food that reflects this specific place and couldn't exist anywhere else. As I soaked in the hot spring after dinner, watching stars appear in the mountain darkness, I felt profound gratitude for the week I'd created for myself. Not just for the luxury experiences, though they'd been extraordinary, but for the discovery that I was capable of adventures I'd never imagined and pleasures I'd never prioritized. My phone had been mostly silent throughout the day, but as I relaxed in the mineral-rich water, I checked the messages that had accumulated. My family was preparing to return home tomorrow, and their final updates from Costa Rica painted a picture of a vacation that had been less successful than they'd hoped. Patricia had sent a group message. Last night here, Marcus is feeling better but still pretty wiped out. We ended up skipping most of today's planned activities and just relaxed at the resort. Sometimes vacation is about knowing your limits, Rachel had added. Honestly, this trip was more physically demanding than we expected. We probably should have planned something more realistic for our group's actual fitness levels. David's response was the most revealing. Makes me appreciate that we didn't bring Mom. This would have been way too much for her, and we would have spent the whole time worrying instead of enjoying ourselves. I stared at that message for a long time, soaking in hot spring water at 7,000 feet elevation after a day that included helicopter travel, mountain hiking, and cliff edge meditation. They were congratulating themselves for excluding me from activities that proved too challenging for them, while I was successfully completing adventures that would intimidate most people regardless of age. For the first time all week, I felt genuinely angry rather than just motivated to prove them wrong. They hadn't protected me from physical challenges I couldn't handle. They denied me experiences I would have loved, while overestimating their own capabilities and underestimating mine. I typed a careful response. Sorry, the trip was more challenging than expected. I've been having amazing adventures here. Today included helicopter travel to a mountain resort and hiking to a cliff edge meditation platform. Feeling grateful for an incredible week of discoveries. This time, the silence that followed felt different. Long enough that I wondered if they were actually thinking about what I'd said rather than dismissing it as confused exaggeration. Finally, Marcus responded. Glad you had a nice week, Mom. Helicopter travel sounds interesting. Was that some kind of sightseeing tour? Something like that, I replied, and left it at that. I spent the evening planning my return home and the conversations that would inevitably follow. Isabella had documented 6 days of adventures that definitively proved my capability to handle any physical challenge, enjoy any luxury experience, and engage with sophisticated environments at the highest levels. The question was no longer whether I was capable of living the life I'd been experiencing this week. The question was whether I wanted to continue hiding that capability from my family, or whether I was ready to change our dynamic permanently. The next morning brought my final adventure of the week, a sunrise hot air balloon flight over the Salinas Valley that would take me from the mountain resort to a landing field near my mansion. Captain Sarah Martinez, a balloon pilot with 20 years of experience, met me at the resort's launch field as the sky began to lighten. Mrs. Hill, this is going to be spectacular. The weather conditions are perfect, and the sunrise views from 1,000 feet above the valley are unforgettable. The balloon preparation was fascinating to watch. The enormous envelope filled slowly with heated air, while the crew checked and rechecked every system. This wasn't the kind of tourist balloon ride offered at county fairs. This was precision aviation equipment designed for luxury passenger experiences over challenging terrain. Isabella documented the entire process, from pre-flight preparations through the actual launch. As the balloon lifted off from the mountain launch field, I felt the familiar thrill of gaining altitude and perspective, but this time with the gentle silence that came from balloon travel, rather than the mechanical noise of helicopters or aircraft. The sunrise over the Salinas Valley was breathtaking. The agricultural fields created geometric patterns in shades of green and gold, while morning mist rose from irrigation channels and collected in hollows between low hills. To the west, the Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly toward the horizon, and to the east, the coastal mountains caught the first light on their peaks. This is one of the most beautiful balloon flights in California, Captain Martinez said, as we drifted south toward the coast. The combination of agriculture, mountains, and ocean creates landscapes that change constantly as the light shifts. For 2 hours, we floated above some of the most expensive and productive agricultural land in the world, watching the landscape transform as the sun climbed higher and the shadows shifted. Isabella captured both the views and my obvious joy in the experience, creating a final set of images that showed a woman completely comfortable with adventure travel, at its most sophisticated. As we began our descent toward the landing field near my mansion, I reflected on the week that was ending. I'd proven to myself that age was no barrier to any experience I chose to pursue. I'd documented capabilities my family had never imagined. I'd discovered interests and aptitudes that could shape the rest of my life. But most importantly, I'd answered the question that had been lurking beneath all the adventures. I was ready to live as the person I'd discovered myself to be, regardless of whether my family was ready to accept that person. The balloon landing was smooth and professional, with ground crew appearing to assist with the deflation and packing process. As I stood in the field watching the enormous envelope fold into its transport container, I felt the symbolic weight of the week coming to a close. That was extraordinary, I told Captain Martinez as she completed the post-flight paperwork. Thank you for a perfect conclusion to an amazing week. Thank you for being such an enthusiastic passenger. It's refreshing to work with someone who really appreciates the experience, rather than just taking photos for social media. Isabella and I drove back to my mansion for the final time, both of us quiet as we processed the week that was ending. The estate looked different now, not just like a luxury property I owned, but like a home where I belonged. A base for the kind of life I was ready to claim permanently. "This has been the most interesting assignment I've ever had," Isabella said as we pulled into the circular driveway. "You've been documenting more than a vacation. You've been documenting a transformation." "What kind of transformation?" I asked, curious about her perspective. "From someone hiding her capabilities to someone ready to claim them. The woman in today's photos is completely different from the woman in the first day's photos, even though you're the same person." We spent the afternoon reviewing the week's photography, selecting images that told the story of adventures and luxury experiences that contradicted every assumption my family had made about my limitations. The documentation was comprehensive. Helicopter tours, yacht charters, art collection, spa treatments, opera attendance, mountain hiking, cliff meditation, and balloon flights. More than that, the photos showed a woman who belonged in these environments, who engaged with sophisticated experiences as someone accustomed to luxury rather than someone trying to prove she could handle it. "What are you planning to do with these?" Isabella asked as we completed the final selection process. "I'm not sure yet," I said. "Maybe nothing, maybe everything, but I want them available when I'm ready to have the conversations that are coming." That evening, I prepared for my return to ordinary life with the same attention to detail I'd brought to the week's adventures. I packed my new clothes, secured the art purchases for transport to my apartment, and arranged for the mansion to return to its rental schedule. But I also made some permanent changes. I called Vivian and asked her to block out 1 week every month for my personal use of the Malibu property. I contacted Captain Rodriguez about regular yacht charters, and Captain Chen about helicopter travel to explore other remote luxury resorts. I scheduled monthly appointments with Dr. Vasquez to maintain the fitness documentation that proved my capability for adventure activities. Most importantly, I made a decision about my living situation that would serve as the foundation for everything else. I was going to sell my modest apartment and move permanently to Malibu, not to hide my wealth anymore, but to live at the level my resources supported and my adventures had proven I was comfortable with. My family would return tomorrow, and within days they'd want to hear about my quiet week at home while they shared stories of their challenging Costa Rican adventure. For the first time, I was ready for those conversations, but not in the way they expected. The final morning brought a call from Tom, Robert's brother, who remained the only family member aware of my real financial situation. "Terry, I've been thinking about our conversation earlier this week. Are you planning to tell them about the real estate investments?" "I'm planning to show them," I said. "There's a difference." "What does that mean?" "It means I'm done hiding who I am to make other people comfortable with their assumptions about what I should be capable of." "That sounds like you're preparing for some major revelations." "I'm preparing to live honestly," I said. "If that requires revelations, so be it." When my family returned from Costa Rica that afternoon, they called to check on me as expected. Patricia's voice carried the careful tone of someone speaking to an elderly relative who might have struggled during their absence. "Hi, Mom. We're back, safe and sound. How was your week? Did you end up taking that river cruise you mentioned?" "I had an extraordinary week," I said, "full of adventures and discoveries. I'm actually planning some changes that I'd like to discuss with all of you." "Changes?" Marcus's voice carried a note of concern. "What kind of changes? Why don't we have Sunday dinner at my place this week?" I said. "I have some things to show you." "Your place?" Rachel asked. "Mom, are you feeling all right? You never host dinner anymore." "I'm feeling better than I have in years," I said. "How does next Sunday work for everyone?" They agreed, probably thinking I wanted to host a welcome home dinner in my small apartment where they could share vacation stories and check on my well-being after a week of what they assumed had been modest senior activities. What they didn't know was that they'd be coming to my Malibu mansion, where Isabella's documentation of my week would be displayed throughout the house, and where they'd finally meet the woman I'd been hiding behind their assumptions about age and capability and appropriate adventure. I spent the week preparing for Sunday dinner with the same strategic thinking I'd applied to real estate investments. The goal wasn't to shock or hurt them, but to establish a new foundation for our relationship based on truth rather than assumptions. Isabella printed the week's photos in large format and created a gallery installation throughout the mansion's main rooms. Each space told part of the story: helicopter adventures in the living room, yacht experiences in the dining room, art collection documentation in the library, mountain resort adventures in the family room. Chef Andreas agreed to prepare Sunday dinner, creating a menu that would showcase the kind of dining I'd been enjoying all week. The wine selection came from the bottles I'd purchased during the vineyard tasting, and the table setting used china and crystal that matched the luxury level of my week's experiences. When Sunday arrived, I dressed carefully in one of the elegant outfits I'd purchased for the week's adventures, added my mother's jewelry, and waited for my family to arrive at the address I'd given them. The security gate at Ocean Vista Estates would be their first surprise. The mansion itself would be their second. But the real revelation would come when they realized that their supposedly frail elderly mother had spent the week they excluded her from having adventures that made their Costa Rican ziplining look like a children's playground activity. At exactly 6 o'clock, the gate buzzer announced their arrival. I opened the gate remotely and watched through the window as their cars wound up the drive, knowing that each curve was revealing more of the estate they'd never imagined I owned. Patricia called my phone as they pulled into the circular drive. "Mom, I think we're at the wrong address. This is some kind of mansion." "You're at exactly the right address," I said. "Come on in." I opened the front door as they climbed the steps, watching their faces register confusion, then shock, then the beginning of understanding that everything they thought they knew about their mother was about to change. "Welcome to my home," I said simply. "I hope you're hungry. We have a lot to discuss." As they entered the magnificent foyer, staring at the chandelier and travertine floors and ocean views, I felt the satisfaction that came from finally living honestly. The week of secret adventures was over. The lifetime of authentic living was just beginning. And for the first time in years, I was exactly where I belonged. At the head of my own table, in my own house, ready to show my family who their mother really was when she stopped hiding her capabilities to protect their assumptions. The conversation that followed would reshape our entire family dynamic. But that's a story for another day. Today was about stepping into the life I'd earned and deserved, regardless of what anyone else thought was appropriate for someone my age. I was Terry Hill, and I was exactly the right age for adventure. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.